So I've been sitting on these screenshots of a debate I had with a member of Antifa on an anarchist communist group. This group is actually kind of private, so I don't even think they realized I was there or realized who I was. And I kind of just lurked for a while and just observed to kind of get an idea for things. But also, I did encounter some anarcho-communists there that, kind of recognized that the idea of going around causing violence everywhere is not the best way for you to convince people that they don't need police. And one of the threads in question was called, "What do we do about people who feel that defund the police is not working?" Now, I'm not going to be able to read you my original replies here because I was banned in the middle of this conversation for daring to question the narrative and asking some very direct questions that kind of make their theories on abolish the police fall apart. But let me start with this part, and I will do my best to reply as I remember. This person says to this issue of what do we do when they say that that defunding is not working. Holly Witten says defunding the police isn't enough. We need total abolition. To which I remember replying, then what are you going to replace it with? And then they said nothing. Policing, community, state, or otherwise, is an inherently oppressive concept even beyond institutions. We need anarchism and trained community self-defense programs that are not prioritized above any other social role and of course are held accountable. And I remember replying afterwards, what are you going to do, when an element like, say, the Mexican cartels or, organized criminal syndicates show up to fill the power vacuum? To which they replied, we defend ourselves and our communities without taking a position of authority or hierarchy over our communities. Now, this is a problem that has actually been, I'm going to read the rest of it in a moment, but I want to stop here to point on this issue. This has actually been a problem that has killed anarcho-communists in the past, and I mean literally killed. In Spain, there was some successful anarcho-communism / anarcho-syndicalism that was going on, and it was ironically Soviet Russia working in tandem with Nazi Germany that ended up destroying them. And one of the things that George Orwell, who was present because he was actually there and part of this revolution, pointed out was that one of the things that got them killed was that they couldn't organize. Everybody was so worried about disrupting hierarchy that they couldn't even function. And your opposition in this situation is absolutely going to be a top-down authoritative situation where people are following orders. And if you don't have your shit together, if people can't accept even some form of hierarchy, even in the terms of like their self-defense militias or whatever, you're going to get quashed. But anyway, thing is, this doesn't work until we get rid of capitalism. All quote-unquote crime, other than quote-unquote crimes of passion, can be traced back to capitalism. Get rid of that and police are unnecessary. And once everyone's needs are met through collectivist solidarity, there will be no power vacuum. Now, one of the major problems with this is that they leave out crimes of passion, which would mean that basically, say, a guy comes home and finds his wife cheating on him, or a wife comes home and finds her husband or wife or whoever cheating on them, gotta be inclusive in our dystopias, and shoots them, then what? That's one of the big problems, as I talked about with Derek Jensen, who's also an anarchist on the left, and he agreed with me, was that unfortunately anarchism tends to attract some really dangerous people and people with a very narcissistic and sometimes even psychopathic and sociopathic, outlook on things. And that does not make up the majority by any means of anarchists that I've talked to, and I don't want to imply that it does. However, it does make up enough of them that you would have to have a way to solve this problem. And a system without hierarchies or prisons or policing is not going to solve that problem. And this issue that there's no power vacuum because you live in a collective of communism, does not in any way account for the fact that there are outside forces, such as Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia with the Spanish, or, just throughout history. You could say that the Native Americans were anarcho-primitivists who got rolled over, by a capitalist society. It's the same thing. Unless you have some kind of common defense, which inevitably is going to have some form of hierarchy, you're going to get quashed. So this conversation continues. Let me move on. So I remember commenting directly about this and suggesting that, they didn't really look at the issues so far as, the truth is that The cartels are literally like armed with weapons that are comparable to the military in Mexico, but anyway, they say, yeah, and those warlords fail to keep wealth when we have the means of growing and producing our own non-hard drugs and addressing the public health issues of hard drugs. That doesn't even address the issue at all. But anyway, then I said, okay, so then what are you going to do when they just show up to try to take what you have? That's literally what this is about. It doesn't just have to be about, some ideological difference that's going to make you in some way different or superior. It's that there are going to be people outside of your organization, your community, who want what you have. This has played out in history over and over and over again. Anarcho-capitalists lean on this idea of the non-aggression principle, that everybody can just agree to be nice. The problem is that doesn't usually happen, especially not in a society that's based on, every man for themselves. So, anyway, she says, we defend it. You really think all us Antifa militants are just gonna stand down? The first thing that popped into my head about this was, no, I don't think you're gonna stand down. I just think you're gonna get your fucking ass kicked. Because you're not organized. You can't even handle, as was recently demonstrated in Portland, Proud Boys with paintball guns, and your antics of burning down buildings that are not being defended, throwing bottles and objects at cops who've been ordered not to shoot you, etc., does not make you capable of defending yourselves. It's a whole different world. What Antifa does not understand, and this is something Villain talked about as well when I did my interview with Villain Report, because he's been out and among them listening to them talk, they have an overinflated impression of how dangerous they are, based on the point, ironically, that the only thing that's saving them right now is the state. That's why so often you hear members of Black Lives Matter and Antifa say, call the police! Every time somebody gets run down because they're blocking a freeway, every time somebody gets shot back, every time somebody gets hurt, etc., etc., etc. Their answer is immediately, ironically, to go to the state. And Antifa does this all the time, and it's hilarious when they do it. And if the state does not intervene the way that they want, then they're not satisfied with that either. Which is why we end up in these goofy situations like Antifa, the supposedly anarchist group, going to show up and threaten, patriots who happen to feel that the government trying to force them to wear masks or take vaccines is government overreach, which doesn't make any sense. It just kind of comes down to them trying to attack anybody who's not them. But anyway, back to the main point. They say that those warlords will not be able to keep wealth if there's no capitalism. But warlords are capitalists. And if you don't want to participate, they'll show up and they'll take what they want, which they do all the time. If you want an idea of what this looks like, do some studying on what Somalia looks like, that is literally ruled by warlords. No police, no government, no central authority whatsoever of any effectiveness. It's all ruled by, I have more AK-47s than you do. That's the end of it. And if you think that you're going to solve that, if you're going to fight back on that with a non-hierarchical, self-defense system, you are fucking naive. Period. And this kind of dumbass shit is the reason why the left looks so stupid right now. It's just what you said is not internally consistent, which is why you had to run to demand that I get censored. Now, I'm not going to give this one as much time, but here's another example of some, real stupidity. We need to abolish the police and overthrow the government. Whilst defunding the police sounds like it would work, it's more diplomacy than revolution, which always ends with more authoritarian bullshit we'll have to take care of in the future. So if there's any doubt that people don't seem to get when I pointed out multiple times that Antifa they say they're anti-fascist, but underlying behind that is that they're anarchist communists, and in some cases, not the friendly kind, that they're anarchists who want the end of the government. You guys are talking about domestic terrorism. You're talking about how bad January 6th was, in how you think it was people being, trying to overthrow the government. And the only reason I honestly feel that that's ridiculous is that those people had no chance, no possible chance of doing that. But that's besides the point. If your obsession is with a movement that's trying to overthrow the government, here's a member of Antifa saying we need to abolish the police and overthrow the government. So that should, I hope, I guess, put some of this to bed, because I'm always being told people don't say this, which is the reason why I do these shows where I've taken screenshots of people saying this kind of dumbass shit. So they immediately go and start a thread. Mods, we got one. Lots of dog whistles and bullshit liberalism. And then Nathan Cord says, they're banned. Actually had my eye on him for a while. And then ironically, somebody below says, this stupid policy and slogan will cost us everything. As in a reference to what the thread is about. I got, censored for arguing the point. And I think actually the final thing I pointed out to her was that the anarcho-communists in Spain were destroyed by actual fascists and authoritarian communists because they couldn't organize. If you guys can't even handle a because I wasn't demeaning, I wasn't insulting, if you can't even handle a mild debate on the topic of how to, work together to defend yourselves, you ain't got a fucking, chance in hell of putting up with any kind of, organized group of people. That's why you just got your ass kicked by Proud Boys with paintball guns. Even though you outnumbered them 4-1. I've seen all the videos, so has everybody else. When an organized force presents itself to you, you don't got nothing. That you are basically trying to suggest that you're going to replace the police with yourselves and the military with yourselves because you're concerned about how police might occasionally pull you over and give you traffic tickets or, catch you with drugs you're not supposed to have. So you're going to trade that problem for a group of people who will show up and absolutely dictate every facet of your life. And if you don't like it, they will kill you. And in a way that you don't even you can't even imagine. If you want to compare that to cops, you got no frickin' clue. It always comes back to the same thing that I discussed with that gentleman that I just had on, Pastor Corey Brooks. You guys don't understand crime, you don't understand criminals, and you don't understand how this stuff works. So your suggestion that, because we've already seen, for example, as Villain pointed out, at the Chaz Chop, what your community policing looked like is you killed 2 innocent people, one of which was 14 years old, by just unloading your gun into a truck. Policing is hard, and your cops were walking around the Chaz basically going out of their way to be as pushy as they could to anybody who they didn't like. And then again, this person down below, once again an anarcho-communist, says, this stupid policy and slogan will cost us everything. Because it's not popular. And it's not popular because it's fucking idiotic. And the only way for you to answer my points about this issue is to demand that the moderators censor me. That's not going to work in an anarcho-communist society. You're not going to have anybody available to do that. So guess what's going to happen next? You're probably going to get an awful lot of fights. And then while you're fighting each other, somebody else is going to be thinking, I want your shit. And then they're going to come take it because you guys cannot organize. You cannot handle even the slightest bit of deviation from what you want to hear. And if that's the case, you're not going to be able to organize in any fashion that's going to be able to stop anybody else who is organized. You got to grow up a little bit, kids. Moving on. Now this one was from a different forum, but it was still me interacting with somebody who thought that they were a big bad Antifa militant. And I said, Ryan Michael, even if you did serve in Iraq, you know full well I am right about the majority of revolutionaries, in quotes, who are kids who need safe spaces, are not going to fare well in any combat zone. And again, bud, you still can't provide links to any evidence to back up your claim about the Tea Party because you are a liar. That was in reference to their claim that supposedly the Tea Party was a riot. I was actually planning to do a video about that too, because the Tea Party was a very specific surgical strike against the property of only one organization. They didn't, or rather company, they didn't just randomly go around Boston burning and breaking shit like you see now. But anyway, he responds, I was in Iraq and I trained with revolutionaries all the time. Revolutionaries literally just rose up and destroyed potentially hundreds of billions of dollars worth of property and fought the most militarized police in human history. Which is it? Are revolutionaries destroying property and looting and being violent? Or are they scared cowards? Both can't be true at the same time. Makes sense you're so confused since you read History Channel propaganda and can't think for yourself, bud. To which I said, Ryan Michael, LOL, throwing bottles at police ordered not to shoot you is not the same thing as fighting the most militarized police. You are again deluding yourself. If the police are actually fighting you back, it would be you would I'm sorry, if the police were actually fighting you back, you would be dead in minutes. This is the same guy that, tried to make that statement to me that he knew what war was and I didn't because he was in Fallujah or whatever. And I said, "Okay, so how often did the Taliban line up across from you with plastic shields, and not do anything while you threw bottles at them and sent insults at them?" Not the same thing at all. And he was trying to, compare himself to the Viet Cong. And I said the Viet Cong were revolutionaries, and they conducted a violent revolution. They didn't face police standing in front of buildings with shields and pepper spray. They wouldn't have been able to get away with getting up close to their enemy and shouting insults at them. I can't believe you actually think you are rising up and fighting the most militarized police force. You guys have gotten soft treatment even for protesters. Where are the water cannons, the dogs, the open use of batons to simply remove you from a place? They are using the batons some, but go back and watch videos of protests. They're basically protesters who were facing real opposition in the 60s. You haven't been tested in anything resembling a real conflict, not as protesters or soldiers of the revolution. And you were being duped into getting labeled terrorists so that the establishment can use the Patriot Act, to cart you off. The reason this is outlined is because he had blocked me at this point. He gave up. But in any case, that was another one of the perfect conversations I've had with a militant Antifa person who thought they were far more dangerous than they actually are. So another thing that I've pointed out repeatedly is that for many people, this defund the police stuff is merely optics so that they can try to eventually move towards the step of full abolishment. So when you get all these conversations where you're being told, nobody ever said abolish the police, they seem to have stopped doing that because that's too obviously untrue. What they really mean is that they want to defund the police, hopefully to prove, you see, we didn't really need police, so that they can move on to abolish them. So we have here, it's easier to get support to defund the police than it is to abolish them, and it isn't easy to get support to defund the police. We need drastic change, but unfortunately we'll probably have to settle for baby steps, since everyone is so scared of making the push. Probably because none of you have demonstrated in any competent fashion how abolishing the police would even fucking work. Just a reminder to everybody about the terms of domestic terrorism, I figured I would finish with this slide, taken from the Cornell Law School. This all comes from the additions from the Patriot Act to the definition of the words domestic terrorism. And yes, Antifa ticks all the boxes, as did Black Lives Matter when they engaged in over 500 riots. And, to be fair to Black Lives Matter, there are individual chapters that have their own feelings and issues on things, as Daryl Davis pointed out. But as I also pointed out to Daryl Davis in retort, they don't do enough to say, this is wrong, we don't want to do this. So, anyway, my next video is going to be a bit closer on the issue of the link between Antifa and communism. Some of the slides that I'm going to use in that one I've used in one of my older videos, but I wanted to make just a video specifically addressing the link between Antifa and communism, so that'll be in one of my upcoming videos here pretty soon. Thanks for listening.